I have it written right beside me. Record, underline 3 times. Oh, well, Zen in everyday life. Anyway, let's go back to the screen share. All right. So, just very briefly, I hope, in the 8th century, you know, two masters who studied with disciples of Huineng, whom we just talked about, two disciples appeared. One of them was, Shito Shichan, who is Sokdo in Korean, which means stonehead. Some of you have probably been called stonehead at one time or another in Korean, but they usually use the more colloquial or the Korean variety, right, of toldegari. But this is, the Chinese for the same, which is Sokdo. And he was supposed to be a very serene, reclusive master. He wrote a couple poems. This is the founder of what became in Japan Soto Zen. What became in Chinese, they called it Kaodong, Soto in Japanese, and Chodong in Korean. All right. And, he was supposed to be serene. And actually, at that time, the other master was called Mazu. And some students actually went back and forth and studied with both of them, these two descendants of Huinengs. And in the, where are we? In the 9th century, a couple teachers, actually this Dongshan was the teacher and Kalshan was his student. And they took their two names, but I guess for phonetic reasons, they put the student's name first. And it became known as Kaldong, which is Soto in Japan and Chodong in Korean. And the emphasis here is on quiet meditation. They do look at Hwadu, they look at koans and kongan and hwadu, but the emphasis during meditation is just as I said before, shikantaza in Japanese, just sitting. Okay, so you have this contrast. The people, the school that I'm going to deal with next, which studies the hwadu, it's a battle. You have to break through. And the Soto approach or the Chodong approach is, you're sure that you're already enlightened. You know that from your study. And so you just sit and wait for enlightenment to come. So Kaldong emphasized quiet meditation. And during the Northern Song, it wasn't so influential, but during the Southern Song, it became, more important. And in fact, maybe the most illustrious Japanese monk in history is Dogen Zenji. And in the 13th century, he went to China. He studied with a Kaldong master. I think it was actually a disciple of Dongshan. And he took Soto back to Japan. So in Japan, you have, I think it's 3 schools of Buddhism, but the 2 main ones are this one, Soto, and the next one, which is called Rinzai. And this is the one that emphasizes quiet sitting. And the other one that's coming up on the next slide, I think, emphasizes the Hwadu, breaking through the Hwadu. Okay, this is Sokdo. This is Dogen, the Japanese monk. And the second of these masters was Mazu Dawi. And he was known for what? Strange words and extraordinary actions, slaps, shouts, nose pulling. When disciples were leaving the room, he would shout their name just as they started to go out. But these were all supposed to be shock techniques, that would startle disciples, into enlightenment, into awakening. And in the 9th century, Lin Chi appeared. Now, Lin Chi, maybe the greatest of the Zen masters, but Lin Chi, his name is Rinzai in Japanese and Imje in Korean. And Korean Buddhism, although it's, of course, it's not the name of the order, but the meditation style that the Koreans follow is Imje Jong, Imje school of meditation. And, you know, in the 12th century, another monk, Dawi appeared, and he was, I guess, 12th generation from Linchi. And he stressed study the Hwadu, not just the stories. Don't study the stories, but concentrate on that critical term, the Hwadu, like what Song Chol Sunim told me in my talk with him. And Dawi influenced both Chinul and Taego in Korean. Remember Chinul? Chinul is the monk that Ned Schultz quite rightly said is often considered to be, the most illustrious monk, most important monk in Korea's history. There are competitors. There's a whole lot of monks, in Korean history, but certainly Chinul is one of the most important. And Dawi, he criticized, this Chodong or Soto, Kaldong school of silent illumination, quiet meditation. And in the 12th century, Linchi's teaching spread to Japan through Eisai. I may have misspelled that. I think there's an extra S there. Eisai Zenji, and it was called Rinzai Zen. So as I was saying before, these Hwadu-oriented practices in Japan and Korea are similar to each other. In Korea, it's the whole tradition. In Japan, it's the Rinzai tradition, okay, called the Imje tradition in Korea. That's Mazu. He looks a little scary, Linji here, Imje. And the last Chinese monk that I'd like to talk about is this guy, okay? And Zongmi was part of the Hetze school, which also traced from Huineng. And, he lived, mostly in the early 9th century. And so, as I said here, it's a third lineage, but he was a patriarch of both the Hwaom school, a doctrinal school, and of Zen, of Chan. And he criticized remember we just talked about Mazu and the Hwadus and so forth, and he criticized that as lacking in an ethical focus. And he argued, this Zongmi argued for sudden enlightenment, gradual cultivation. In other words, once you have your awakening experience, you need to continue to study and, perfect your karma, because your actions and your thinking are not 100% revolutionized. They have to be fostered through cultivation. This is a little heretical, from the Mazu tradition's perspective. For them, the scriptures are not so important, and so forth. Now, in Korea, I used to go, as like many of you, I visited a lot of the famous temples in South Korea, and I didn't realize that many of them, like the most famous ones, like, Pulguksa and Haeinsa and so forth, when you really get to know the temple, there's a special hall. There's a hall to Vairocana Buddha, the cosmic Buddha, called Birokana Bul, or just Biro Bul in Korean. And that's the cosmic Buddha that is embraced by Hwaom school. And it's one of the schools, it's based on the Flower Garland Sutra. What is that? The Avatamsaka Sutra, which is luckily just in Korean, for example, known as the Hwaom Kyung. Okay. And And so anyway, he influenced Chinul. So this is where, we're both Dawi and Tsungmi influenced Chinul in Korea. Okay, we can't go over the early Korean. You can look at that later if you want. But has anybody heard of Wisang? Wisang was Wanyo. Wanyo is one of Chinol's competitors for the most important monk in Korean history. And he was a Shila monk, and Wanyo and Lisang were friends. They tried to go to China once. They were turned back at the border, and they wanted to go to China again. Okay, and they stopped at a cave during a storm. This is a famous story in Korean Buddhism. And during the night, they found a cave and they were sleeping out the storm. And in the middle, Wanyo woke up and he was very thirsty. And he found a bowl, groping around in the darkness. And he drank the water and it was just delicious. In the morning, he woke up and he saw that it was a skull. They were in a burial crypt. And it was a skull with maggots and, really polluted water. And he had an awakening, that everything is mind. So he told his friend Li Sang, you go on to China. I'm good. I'm good right where I am here. Okay. And then he went on, to become this very, very famous monk in Korea. And the first of the monks that tried to harmonize. Hwajang, he called it, to harmonize. And Wanyo wanted to harmonize, different schools of Buddhism. But his buddy Huisang went to China and became a Hwaom patriarch. Okay, he studied, well, not patriarch, in Korea he did, but he studied with the second and third Hwayan patriarchs, this doctrinal school. He returned to Korea in 670 to warn Shila that Tang, its recent ally, was about to attack it, about to attack them. This is more on the different schools of Buddhism as they came. Here's Huanyo with harmonization and so forth. But during the latter years of Shila, Sun or Zen became accepted. I mentioned earlier that Pomnang had studied with the fourth patriarch. The first monasteries were established in the 8th or 9th century, and they were called, as Ned mentioned in his talk, the 9 mountain schools. All, or 8 of them, essentially trace back to Mazu and Huadu study. Although Pomnang had been there before Huineng, but his followers went to China and, associated with the Mazu line. Only one, the 9th one, the most recent one to be established, was the Sumisan school. And this was Master Eom. And Eom, as you can see, was like a 10th century master. He went to China, but he studied with the Caodong school. Which school is that?
Soto.
It's the Soto school, or it's the, silent illumination school. And when he returned to Korea, the first Koryo king, Taejo, liked him very much, brought him to court, and he built a temple for him on Sumi Mountain. And it was the last of the 9 mountain schools to be established. And he was a famous teacher. Hundreds of monks gathered around him. But later, when we get to Chinul, which is, I think, right around the corner, and the attempts at harmonizing Korean Buddhism, this line essentially disappeared. I say that with a little bit of regret, because I practiced Soto and I practiced the Korean Imje, and I think, and I've had some limited success with both, and I think they're both useful, the two quite different traditions. But the Soto tradition has disappeared in Korea. You talk to people very knowledgeable, they know about it, they've heard about it, but nobody teaches it. In other words, the masters all teach Hwadu study
Can I ask you a question at this point? Can I ask
sure,
you a question?
sure.
I've heard that in recent years, like since the 90s or so, with younger people, that meditation has become something of great interest, and that there are many meditation centers, private centers that people go to, and just together they meditate. Is that all sun meditation? Is it all the koan oriented meditation, or do
I
they do
think it,
some?
Charlie, I think it mostly is. But there are, for example, I can't remember his name right now. There is a famous Korean monk who sort of advertises that he teaches mindfulness, the
Mhm.
Theravada tradition. I think
Yes.
he studied in Southeast Asia. One of my friends, who's a former government unification ministry assistant minister, he at the meditation, I've been going to Bongunsa meditation. I haven't gone for a year because of the virus, but for about 4 years, I was going there, 4 or 5 mornings a week, to do a couple hours of meditation. And he told me when I talked about this, Soto school and so forth, he said, oh, some people are, there's a renewed interest in that. But I think the teachers, like the meditation monks, when they receive instruction,
Mm.
meditation monks, as I said before, they do, 6 months of meditation a year, some of them for 10, 20 years, consecutively. I think they're always given Hwadu. And the patriarchs, for example, in interviews, I remember an interview with a recent patriarch, and the journalist, the Buddhist journalist, asked the patriarch, well, some people think the limited success of meditation here in Korea is because, it's so Hwadu based. It's either Hwadu or nothing. And the patriarch defended the Hwadu. He said the Hwadu is the way. It's the shortcut to enlightenment. You can practice silent meditation for centuries and never have a breakthrough. So
So,
I think officially it still is, Charlie.
but just to follow on, so that means that even these lay meditators, people who have regular jobs, they're just sort of ordinary workaday types, but interested in meditation, and they'll go, a couple times a week, maybe
Okay.
to a meditation center. They're doing Hwadu as well.
Well, I have only limited information about that. The meditation group that I belong to probably has 100 Koreans, most of them grandmothers, some
Mhm.
grandfathers, a few younger people, at the temple. And when I first started meditating there, I had to have an interview with the monk, the Zen teacher monk. And he gave, he talked about a Hwadu. He asked if I had a Hwadu. I told him what my Hwadu was. He said, good, work on that, and if you have any questions, come back and talk to me,
Mhm.
about it. So when I ask, like, my friends there, I was friends with one of the grandmothers, and I ask her, all these grandmas that are meditating every morning, how many are doing Hwadu? And she said, well, some are and some aren't.
Mhm.
So that's the only, that's the only data I have, man. I think, I've run into meditators, like down in Guam, we organize a little meditation group at a Korean temple. And there was a woman there, and, she had done some retreats. And, when I talked about Hwadu and this and that, she said, well, I do my own style. Yeah, I know what you're talking about, but I have my own style of meditation. So, and even meditation monks, how many of them gravitate into their own style of meditation, that isn't so Hwadu directed? I'm not sure. I mean, it's a great question. It's a question, that's in my mind, but I'm not sure. I'll let you know when I find out, if and when I find out more about that. So we get to Koryo, And we talked about Sumisan and the Chodong silent meditation. And then, Chante, a second doctrinal school, becomes important back then. And then we get to Chino. This is the monk that Ned talked about. He established a meditation and wisdom society that later became Songwangsa, the school famous for, one of the temples most famous for meditation. And as I sort of said earlier, Chino believed in harmonizing Hua Hom doctrine that I just talked about. It's Keigon in Japanese, by the way, and Sun, the Zen meditation practice. I presented the third master back in the 8th century was this, Zongmi. And I told you he was a patriarch of both the Hua Hom school and the Zen school. And Chino, centuries later, was very impressed with Chongmi's writings. And, because of Chino's influence, Korean Buddhism has included both doctrinal and practice approaches. Let me just tell you about Chino, though. He's a little unusual. He had 3 enlightenments as a Zen teacher, but all 3 were related to study. That's a little heretical. I mean, it's a lot like Tsumi, in his teachings, but it's a little heretical. You're supposed to have it's a master validates it. Chino, I don't think, had masters. His awakenings came, on his own. And 2 of them were connected to sutra study. One, the Platform Sutra, the one about Huineng. A second one, the Hua Hom Sutra, the Advatam Saka Sutra. And the third one, this Dawi's teaching. Do you remember what Dawi stressed? It's the next point if you want to cheat. Huadu. This is the monk in China that came up with, you got to study the Huadu approach. So Chino's a little unusual. There he is in that respect. But about a century and a half after him, Taego comes along. And he's also considered a co-founder of the Choge Zen order. So, it's very complicated. I found a lot of this out getting ready for this talk, but, it's very complicated, this harmonization, because the first couple harmonizations really were just the Zen school, the 9 mountains being, coalesced into Choge Zen school, and some kings played a role in this as well. King Gongmin of the Koryo, and Sejong of the Chosun dynasty, for somewhat different reasons, I think, little different reasons anyway. They both advocated, consolidation of the Zen schools. But here's what's interesting about Taego. There was another monk, what was his name? Naong, who was kind of a younger contemporary of Taego. Both of them supposedly, through Huadu study, were enlightened. But even though they were already enlightened, they traveled to China to have it validated. So they searched out, the Linji school masters, and these masters validated. They gave them Inca. They validated their enlightenment, and they returned to Korea. And most of the later Korean Zen lineages traced, from this monk, Taego. Actually, Naong, there his name is, Naong's line sort of died out, but Taego's apparently did not. By the way, when you talk about Zen lineages, it's kind of like the family genealogies. They can't be completely trusted. There's a lot of fabrication that takes place. So, for example, disciples will go back and try to establish links, between their master and, long ago masters. And that's Taego. I'm going to skip over him, but Sosan Desa was the famous monk during the Hideyoshi invasions, who organized, along with some of his junior monks. He was a Zen master. They organized the righteous armies that apparently played an important role, in fighting the Japanese armies. And people say that Buddhism gained a little bit. Buddhism didn't do so well during the Chosun dynasty, where Neo-Confucianism was promulgated. But there was some benefit to these righteous armies. They improved reception to Buddhism. I have a lot more information about the Choge order, more about the retreats, in case you're thinking about joining a retreat. Let me just do a full circle, if I may, very briefly. Songchol, this is the monk that I met, that charming story that I told at the beginning of the talk. But, he challenged Chino, in his, Heinsa school. And he said that Chino had said sudden enlightenment, gradual cultivation. And Songchol says that's wrong. That Huineng, had argued for sudden enlightenment, sudden cultivation. Okay. And anyway, Songchol died at Heinsa. His last words were, meditate well. His last words to me were, meditate diligently. But anyway, and I'm sure I've let him down. When Songchol died, my wife, who's not interested in Buddhism at all, my wife, this was, a long time ago in 1993, my wife actually was announcing to me, at 11 tonight, they're going to have a sati count, meaning that they were doing a cremation at night of Songchol, and all the monks were going to go through the ashes looking for these jewels. These, some of them are white, some are black, and in Buddhist lore in Asia, that when great masters are cremated, they sometimes find a couple sati, these deposits, these jewel-like deposits. More than 100 were found in Songchol's cremation remains, most of them in his abdominal area and in his head. And I couldn't find a picture. I searched the internet and couldn't find a photo of them, but I remember seeing a photo in the newspaper back then, of the sati. One last thing, I'm out of time. Frank, you're out of time. Some of you may be familiar with the Quantum school of Zen. And Quantum school is an international school. It started out from the Choge order, and the monk was Sung-san. And Sung-san supposedly, I shouldn't say that, Sung-san received, Inca, from one of the great masters, and he went to Providence, Rhode Island, and Cambridge, Massachusetts, and so forth, and set up, gradually, he didn't speak any English at first, he set up a school of Buddhism called the, Quantum school. Quantum is the Bodhisattva of compassion, or Kanon in Japanese. And he started this school. And today, I believe it's the largest Korean school in North America. There's many, many centers, and there's one center here in Korea. Well, there's two, but the main center is Musangsa, which is down on Keryong Mountain, Keryongsan. And Musangsa has an American abbot, and most of the monks are Russian, Ukrainian, from UK, Hong Kong, Singapore. They're very, very international. There's a couple Koreans too, but it's a very, very international order. They've maintained their independence from Choge. and they're very open to retreats, and they're more democratic. Remember, I told you that unlike my experience, lay people and monks aren't supposed to do retreats together. In the quantum school, they do retreats together. There's no problem with that. The monks do eat separately, though. You know, you have to have some boundaries. The monks eat at their own table. But, you know, when it comes to meditation, lay people and monks sit together. Some of the masters, the Zen masters in that school are lay people. You know, and so it's a very democratic. They don't really do Huadu study. He spent time. This guy, Sun San, the monk who started this school, he's dead. You know, I saw him once on the stairway of Huagesa. You know, I bowed to him. I think he nodded back. But anyway, he died some time ago. But he spent time in Japan before he went to the States. And he learned, he kind of took some of those Rinzai ideas. So they have a kind of curriculum. In other words, each time you meet with a master in an interview, he'll ask you about a different one of the important koans that they talk about. And anyway, I've done a couple retreats there, and I really like them. They're really nice people. But it's a kind of hybrid approach, between the Korean, choge or imje approach and the Japanese rinzai, perhaps. But it's very, very popular overseas, and they're very open, to lay people and lay participation. Okay, some other time I'll show you some pictures of Musangsa and the American abbot. Anyway. I'm sorry, I may have raced through this a little too quickly, but anyway, thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, does anybody else have any questions before we go into our infamous breakout rooms?
So Frank, just a real curious question. The slap that Song Cho gave you, remember the slap you got after you left the interview with Song Cho?
I am still vibrating. Was that the question?
Wait, was that basically then from the Mazu tradition? Remember you talked about Mazu and how he believed in giving.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that was the connection.
And what did he do? Why was I levitating? I've asked a bunch of Zen teachers and so forth. Nobody knows, and I'm not susceptible, to that. Alan Taylor, you're sharing your screen. Did you want to do that? Okay. I don't know what that was. I mean, the Korean explanation is it's ki, it's energy. He was showing me, how powerful his energy was. But yeah, that slap. I had the same thing happen at Harvard Divinity School. I was taking a class with this guy who, what was his name? Panikar, back at the same time some of you were there. And Panikar was half Indian and half Spanish or something. And he was a really enlightened guy. And when we had interviews, Harvard Divinity School was kind of really, serious looking people with trimmed beards and so forth. And anyway, I had an interview, and we all had a final interview with Panikar. And when I showed up at the international, whatever it was, religious center, in the middle of the divinity campus, this guy comes bursting out of the building, just radiant. I mean, this guy was just exploding with joy as he came through the door. And I thought, wow, that's different around here. I wasn't expecting that. I go up the stairs. I have an interview with Panikar. He's in robes, Indian robes, and, asking me about what am I going to do in the future. Anyway, he talks about my paper that I wrote. And as I walk out, I'm saying goodbye and thanking him. And so whack, he hits me on the shoulder. And as I go down the stairs, I think, I'm feeling like the guy in front of me that burst through the doors. That's quite a trick. It really works. Maybe it's the timing. I'm not sure. It's either the key or the timing or both. Anyway.
Um, can I ask you, I was surprised when I found that in Korea now they have temple stays for foreigners.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's kind of I think kind of a tourist
It
program.
is very interesting. And actually there are more Korean participants these days than international ones.
Mhm.
And it's even some Christians go for temple stay. But yeah, it's groups go there for group binding, membership training, MT sort of stuff. And it's very, very interesting. And it's changed temples, where temples were a place to go study for exams, or to meditate, pursue some sort of, religious. But now it's the temples are teaching culture. I participated. I've done a couple stuff. In the old days, you just went and stayed at the temple. Now, if you want to stay at the temple, you gotta go through the temple stay office. But anyway, they'll have they'll ask, what kind of program do you want? You can do a tea ceremony. You can do copying sutras. You can do walking meditation in the woods. And you're encouraged to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and participate in the morning Yebul, and things of that sort. So it's quite a deal. I had a military. Yeah, go ahead, Charlie. Sorry.
I just wanted to mention in connection with the Quantum School and Sungsan Sunim,
Right.
I have some experience, not with him, but my main meditation teacher while I was living in Cambridge, when I started doing it seriously, was a fellow named Larry Rosenberg, a nice Buddhist name.
Yeah.
And he was a close colleague of a couple of other guys, same generation. One of them was Jack Kornfield, and the other one was Joseph Goldstein. And all of Jack and Joseph were both Peace Corps volunteers in Thailand a couple of years before we were, and learned, became very interested in Buddhism and meditation, stayed on a while after the Peace Corps, stayed at monasteries, and then took it back to the United States. And of course, what they were introducing was the Theravada tradition.
Do you remember the book that we talked about that they co-wrote about mindfulness?
Yeah, they both written a number of books, and they
wrote one together that I used to read all the time.
Yeah, they're really good, really standard works for in American Buddhism. They were kind of forerunners of the whole of all of this, and Larry was part of that. Larry was a professor of psychology at Harvard, and became interested in Buddhism, and resigned and went to Japan, came back, and then he met up with a guy in Cambridge named Sungsan Sunim. And he was very much influenced by him, went to Korea and studied with the Sungsan for about a year and came back. What he eventually came up with was a kind of, and he does apply some of Sungsan's ideas, but he's mostly in the mindfulness, sort of Theravada.
That's Larry.
That's Larry and Joseph and the other people who are sort of at the forefront of American mindfulness meditation. That's where that all comes from, going back to the 1980s and 1990s. So I thought it was interesting that there is that connection. And,
good. That's great. And these days there's podcasts of all these people. You can find, podcasts.
Oh yeah, I know. There's a huge amount of resources online that you can access. It's part of the what is it called, Dana, the idea of Buddhist of charity, that you want to make the Dharma available to everyone, and you shouldn't try to charge for it like you do at these meditation retreats that Bobby was talking about, at the Buddhist temples in where you have to pay. That's a source of revenue for the temples in Korea. These the temple stays, yeah.
Temple
They,
State,
they make money on that.
right.
It was not to say that it's completely mercenary. I mean, they're trying to teach the Dharma, but at the
But,
same time,
30,000 won a day and 3 square meals. It ain't bad.
it's not a bad deal. No, it certainly isn't. Certainly isn't.
So Frank, I've got a question. I tuned in late. I'm sorry, so I didn't catch the first part of your presentation. But I'm wondering, you know, with all these different schools and all these different monks and approaches, in your experience, experiencing it and studying it, what do the differences amount to?
Well, I'm not a Zen teacher, so I don't, but my personal opinion is that the different styles of meditation are all good. In other words, they all have beneficial effects on most people.
Is it just stylistic, do you think, or is it more than that?
I'm not absolutely sure because I've only done those 2 Zen traditions. I really haven't done mindfulness, the Theravada traditions. I'm not sure. I don't know, and what's the I'm not quite sure, David. But I think they're all good. I think
Right, absolutely.
But it sounds like they have some contempt for one another. At least that one fellow that the man that you talk mostly about, he seemed to have no time whatsoever for any other approach but his own.
Well, yeah, he's very much of absolutist.
But that's not typical so much among the different schools.
Well, I don't know. Like I say, the schools do have loyalty to their basic teachings, and so in Korea, if you talk to lots of people about meditation, they tell you, oh, you need a hwadu. Hwadu is the way. That's where you have your big breakthrough. Without that, it might be good for you. It's like yoga, Charlie. I don't know. Yeah, that's a good observation. Would you like to do a breakout room?
Yeah.
I'm sorry I forgot to start the recording. But okay, stop recording.